Samantha stood before the HOA board, her heart racing. In her hands, she held a document that threatened to undo everything. She slammed it onto the table, and the president's face went white. The air thickened with tension. What happened next would shatter everything they thought they knew about power. But let's start from the beginning. Samantha Gray had always envisioned her front yard as a peaceful sanctuary, a place where nature could thrive. Living in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Denver, she knew it would take time and effort, but that didn't stop her. Her love for the environment drove her every step of the way. After months of planning, she finally began the project she had dreamed about, planting native trees that would flourish in the Colorado soil. The first tree, an ancient oak, was the heart of her vision. She stood back, surveying the yard, feeling a quiet sense of triumph as she placed it in the center. It wasn't just a tree. It was a statement. To Samantha, it symbolized her dedication to nature, to creating something lasting and beautiful. But her sense of accomplishment was fleeting. Less than a week later, she found a letter from the Homeowners Association, HOA, waiting for her. As she read through the formal notice, her stomach twisted in disbelief. The tree violated HOA guidelines. She hadn't realized that, according to their rules, any landscaping had to be approved beforehand. Samantha had never been informed of this when she moved in, and the sudden threat of fines, legal action, and the forced removal of her tree felt like an unwarranted attack. It wasn't just about the tree. It was about principle. Samantha was stunned by the narrowness of the HOA's policies she felt were less about maintaining the neighborhood and more about asserting control over trivial matters. She had lived here for years without any issues, never disrupting the harmony of the community. Yet, now, the same organization that had once been an abstract presence was demanding she undo the very thing that brought her peace. It wasn't just the oak tree they were taking from her. It was her belief in the simple joys of living naturally, without interference. The injustice of it hit her hard. She had acted out of a genuine desire to improve the environment and her community. To have that rejected in such a cold, bureaucratic manner was a blow she couldn't ignore. Samantha's frustration quickly escalated into full-blown fury. She wasn't just dealing with an unreasonable rule. She was up against an entrenched system of control. After digging deeper, she learned that the HOA president, Karen Davis, had been in charge for over a decade. Karen had established herself as a force in the neighborhood, running the association with an iron fist. Under her leadership, the rules were enforced rigidly, down to the smallest detail. While many residents resented Karen's authority, Samantha was shocked by the sheer extent of her power and the way she'd taken pleasure in controlling every aspect of the neighborhood's appearance. Samantha soon realized she wasn't the first to face this kind of unjust treatment. Neighbors confided in her about their own experiences. Fines for insignificant offenses like painting fences the wrong shade of white or installing a backyard swing set without HOA approval. The entire community had been living under the thumb of an overly powerful HOA for years. But despite their frustration, no one had ever pushed back. Fear of further punishment had kept everyone in line. But for Samantha, this wasn't just about a tree. It was about standing up to a regime of petty tyranny that had cast a long shadow over the neighborhood. She wasn't going to let Karen's rigid, arbitrary control go unchecked. Samantha decided it was time to fight back, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been silenced by the HOA's grip. She started by reaching out to her neighbors, many of whom expressed sympathy and support for her cause. To her surprise, several of them admitted they'd been penalized for ridiculous reasons. The realization hit hard. The HOA wasn't just a set of rules. It was a tool of fear and oppression. Determined to take action, Samantha dove into local laws, researching every possible loophole that could help her. It didn't take long for her to discover something crucial. The city's zoning laws granted property owners the right to plant trees on their land, regardless of HOA restrictions. This revelation gave her the ammunition she needed. Armed with knowledge and the support of her neighbors, Samantha made a bold decision. She would take her fight public and expose the HOA's unjust power. Samantha knew the HOA wouldn't back down without a fight, but what unfolded next left everyone in the room stunned. Karen Davis, the HOA president, called for an emergency meeting, her voice dripping with authority as she demanded the removal of Samantha's tree. The atmosphere was thick with tension as neighbors gathered, eager to witness the drama that had been building for days. There was a palpable sense of anticipation, like a powder keg just waiting to explode. Karen stood at the front of the room, her usual air of superiority in full display. She demanded compliance, reciting the HOA's rules as if they were sacrosanct. But this time Samantha wasn't intimidated. She stood up, her hands steady, her eyes focused on Karen, and addressed the room with the calm confidence of someone who knew they were right. "I've spoken to a lawyer, and according to city law, I have every right to plant trees on my property. Your rules cannot supersede local ordinances. If you force me to remove the tree, I will take legal action," Samantha declared, her voice clear and unwavering. The room fell into an eerie silence. For the first time, Karen's composed demeanor faltered. Her face went ashen as the weight of the situation hit her. She had underestimated Samantha, and now the HOA was staring down the barrel of a legal battle they didn't want. The board members exchanged quick, nervous glances, unsure of how to proceed. They had always gotten their way, but this was different. Murmurs rippled through the room. Samantha's neighbors, who had silently endured the HOA's oppressive rules for years, began to speak up in her support. Some of them even hinted at the possibility of lawsuits against the HOA for their years of overreach. Karen, desperate to salvage control, tried to rally the board with a few more forceful words, but her efforts fell flat. The board voted, and with little surprise, they had no choice but to concede. Samantha had won. The oak tree stood tall, untouched, and the HOA had to issue an official apology, a public admission of their defeat. The victory wasn't just about a tree. It was a triumph over years of petty tyranny. Samantha's victory was more than just about the tree. It was about standing up to an unjust system and reclaiming her rights. The local law she had uncovered had turned the tide, and Karen Davis's reign over the HOA came to an abrupt end. Soon after, Karen resigned, unable to face the fallout from the public outcry. In the weeks that followed, other residents began to push back against the HOA's restrictive rules. A petition was started to reform the board, and many of the outdated and controlling regulations were revoked. Samantha's actions had inspired a movement, one that put the power back into the hands of the residents. For Samantha, the victory was personal. Not only had she kept her tree, but she had also restored some sense of fairness and justice to her community. As she sat in her front yard under the shade of her oak tree, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had stood up for what was right and, in the end, had made the HOA pay for their mistake.